Well, first of all, and again Samuel referred to this, verses 9 to 20 in the final chapter were absolutely introduced pretty much after the Greek manuscript tradition ended. So about 500 years after the text would have initially been written. And the reality is we don't know how the gospel ends. And these verses would comprise around about 2% of the total corpus of the gospel itself, because of how small it is. Now, Bruce Metzger himself, and Samuel quoted him, and he was a committed Christian, attests to this, that these verses are absolutely not part of the original. No doubt whatsoever. Interestingly enough, also, the first verse is disputed amongst early manuscripts. Some of them include the Son of God, some of them don't. All right. Now that's an interesting point. Now then when we go on to say there's literally dozens of variants in the manuscript, the earliest manuscripts of Mark, and the earliest one that we have is about 200 years after it would have been written. That raises serious questions about what I can actually know about that gospel. Now Samuel, and this is point C on Samuel's note, point E, he quoted Norman Geisler and said that if a single letter is different in a word, that counts as a variant. Well, the Gospel according to Mark gives a prime example of where a single letter difference in a word can actually make a significant difference in the meaning. If we go to chapter 1, verse 41, there's two Greek words that appear, different Greek words that appear in different manuscript traditions. One is ethrahem, and the other one is ethraem. Okay, one means angry, one means compassion. Okay, for those of you that know this verse, you'll know that in most Bibles today it says that Jesus saw the leper and then showed compassion. Some of the earliest versions, and the earliest versions indeed, say that Jesus got angry. Okay, and the difference between these two words is one letter. That's a variant. The meaning is completely different. So how much of that can be relied upon? The Gospel according to John, I would give a similar argument. We know that the precope adulterae is absolutely not existing in the Gospel according to John in the first 400 years of its manuscript tradition. So at least 400 years after the original author of John wrote the Gospel, someone included the story about Jesus forgiving the adulteress, and now it's in every Bible that we have today. These are objective facts. They're not sensationalists. We can look at the epistle according to the Hebrews. It has anonymous authorship. We don't know who wrote it. Now, it was initially included in the canon at the Council of Trent because the scholars at the time thought that it was written by the Apostle Paul. We now know it was written over 100 years after Paul would have died. And interestingly enough, the same council excluded another book, The Shepherd of Hermas, because it had anonymous authorship. Okay, so the reality is within your scripture today, you have massive chunks that were included hundreds of years after the time of Jesus, and at times we don't even know who the authors were. What does that actually say about the text? Now, I'm not talking about the spelling mistakes that have no bearing on the meaning. I'm talking about the real stuff. And there's enough of the real stuff, really, for me to have pretty significant doubt.
You mentioned that Mark 16, as I brought up, Mark 16 and the 11 verses at the end of that, and John 11, that, they're absolutely not in it. Well, we don't know if they're absolutely not in it. It's not as simple as saying they're absolutely not. Again, this is where we've got to look at the evidence, and where I had that table for you, where I showed you the family trees of the copies and how scholars look at these, and we can see where something has been introduced. And this is what we do. Now, Abdullah said it's massive chunks. Well, there's only two of them. They're not massive chunks. There's 11 verses here, 11 verses there. And this is part of the work that we do, that we look at the ancient manuscripts, and if we see something like that, and there's only two of those, we can identify them. You mentioned that Hebrews wasn't part of the Christian canon in some places, and that's right, the Christians discuss this.
Now, it's interesting that Samuel said it's not as simple as absolutely not whether the ending of the Gospel according to Mark, the longer ending and shorter ending, should be in there or not, and whether the precope adulterae should be in the Gospel according to John or not. Well, if it's not that simple, then you don't know. You don't know what you have. That's it. The conversation is over. Samuel also then went on to say, well, there's not massive chunks, there's only two of them. Well, no, I referred to another verse in Mark, the opening verse, where it says, this is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, in half of the earliest versions it says that, and the other half of the earliest versions it says, this is the gospel of Jesus Christ, and omits the Son of God. So was that said or was that not said? I also quoted another verse from the first chapter of the Gospel according to Mark, where a single Greek letter has caused two different meanings to emerge. Okay, we can go on and on and on. We can go through every Gospel account. It's as simple as that. So we might not find massive chunks of 11 verses here, and in the case of the Gospel according to John, 18 verses there, but we'll find one verse with significant differences, and then 2 or 3 that most people agree on, most manuscripts agree on, and then another one with significant differences. So when we get to the end of it, the Christian needs to concede a certain threshold point. Well, I can be certain about 95% or 90% or 75% or whatever. There needs to be a threshold point. It is absolutely not 100. That's it. The conversation's over. With regards to us, however, and I'll just add one more point there. My issue with the Epistle to the Hebrews wasn't that it was a late inclusion to the canon or whatever, it's that it has anonymous authorship. That's my issue. So you've got books that you can't be sure about who wrote them. Not even a rough guide.
قل يا أهل الكتاب لا تغلوا في دينكم غير الحق ولا تتبعوا أهواء قوم قد ضلوا من قبل وأضلوا كثيرا وضلوا عن سواء السبيل